Welcome everybody. In this new video I will talk about the C64. Where should I start? Well, it is not that easy. The easiest if I continue the story where I finished the VIC-20. It was the time when they introduced it to the market, but it was not that simple. The VIC Commodore and the marketing team couldn't rest. They pushed the pedal to the metal. They spent late 1980 and even 81 with many things. They prepared marketing materials, new box for the US launch or relaunch, and developed more and more software for the machine. It was run in parallel with my current story. So many activities were run in parallel with the C64 design, and it is good to know before I start to talk about the C64, because those were the reasons behind why the design of the C64 was engineering driven. To design a new machine came from two directions at the same time. Tramiel was happy with the quick release of the VIC-20, but he knew that it was just a stopgap. His plan was to push engineers to build a new, better machine for the 82 Winter CES. At the same time, his MOS engineers also started to think about a new chipset. I say chipset because they were responsible for chip design and manufacturing. When they started to collect ideas for a family of chips, their plan was to design something not for a computer, but with the capability of a game console, because they thought that is what Commodore could sell to other companies. For example, there was the 6510, a 6502 variant with integrated I/O ports, or the advanced peripheral chip, which was the MOS 6526 CIA. Such a chip could make it easy to design a console. Of course, the graphics and sound required a full rehaul. The VIC chip had to be replaced with a more sophisticated solution with a proper 40-character screen. This is what they failed to design for the toy, so their decision was to design it from scratch. In early 1981, the two directions met each other. Winterble presented their ideas to Tramiel and asked for permission to start a project. But before he could finish, Tramiel simply said, "Do it." The engineers asked for time to prepare a market study to prepare details. As usual, Tramiel pushed his engineers, so they got not more than 10 days. They had just a few days to buy and test the best systems of the time. They simply went out and bought different consoles and home computers and played games for several days. The result was influenced by different Atari models, including the 800, the Texas Instruments 99/4A, and also by the Intellivision console. At the end, they prepared a feature list. They decided to use DRAM, so instead of static RAM, because it was much cheaper, and those chips were used by the Atari and Texas computers. They also decided to have a better sprite support than Atari and TI. 8 multicore sprites with hardware support to move them all around the screen, and as well as collision detection. Tramiel approved the concept, but instructed them to keep the project a secret. He said something like, "It is engineering driven, and when it is done, we'll tell marketing about it." The engineers decided to split the functionalities of the first VIC to two chips. The new VIC II chip was much more complex. In April 1981, Al Carpentier started to work on the new video, while Bob Yanes on the sound chip. Carpentier developed a feature list and arranged it based on his priorities. With Tramiel's support, there were two major limitations: time and chip size. It is easy to repeat his calculations because the mean parameters can be derived from the 40 by 25 character target. If a single character uses 8 by 8 pixels, then we get 320 by 200 resolution. It is close to the practical limit of a TV screen and requires almost 8 KB of memory in case we use only two colors. He made it possible to redefine those two colors for each 8 by 8 pixel block, so for each character. It is also possible to use more colors in a given block, but in that case the horizontal resolution is reduced to the half So at the end we have just 160 by 200 pixels. The VIC II can address 16 kilobyte and use the secondary 8 kilobyte to store the sprites. Around 75% of the chip was used by this sprite functionality. The technical details are nice, but he had also time pressure. It was very common to work 12 or even more hours per day, but Tramiel was not fully satisfied and kept beating the engineers. Based on Tom Chick, at the end the engineers said something like, "If we close the factory, we can do it within 2 weeks." Tramiel's response was a kind of Bianco check. That is exactly what I want. So they had full support from the big boss. At the same time, Yannis worked on the sound generator. He had to adapt his ideas to technical limitations as well. Today we use samples to play sound from memory, but back then memory was expensive and very limited. So he decided to use oscillators. His original plan to use 32 voices were quickly reduced to 3. But he added so many functions, I think I cannot list all of them. Let me focus on the major ones. The voices can be not just square waves, as it was common that time, but can be set to pulse, triangle, noise, and sawtooth wave. He made it possible to use a combination of them. The whole chip was a complex mixture of analog and digital circuits. A voice can ring modulate another one, and also they can be synchronized to each other. There are also low and high pass filters and a sound input. If it sounds complicated, don't worry, it is really complicated. The SID was way ahead of the concurrent chips, but Yannis was just particularly happy with it. He had to drop a lot of his ideas because of time pressure, and on top of that, the SID was noisy. Later on, the coders figured out if they turn off those oscillators, the noise is really going down or even disappearing. So it was possible to handle that, but still it was far from his original plans. The chips were ready to enter the market, but the next step was a surprise for the engineers. Why they designed the chipset for the consoles, Tramiel had a better plan. It is going to be a strictly Commodore product, but you would be wrong if he was talking about the C64. Before the creation of the VIC-20, there was a fight between Tramiel and Paddle about the future of their business machines. Now Tramiel gave instruction to create the pad based on the new VIC-2. The target may remind you of the toy project. The new CBM II series consisted of business and personal models with up to 256 kilobytes of memory and had a new 6502 variant to be able to handle the memory paging. The machine also featured the new BASIC 4.0 variant. The development was not an easy process. They missed the experience of the fired West Coast engineers. Tramiel's recklessness backfired. The result was a flop. They were able to sell only a few thousand of those new machines, even if they got their stylish Porsche concept design. Maybe I will talk about them in a separated video. Let's step forward. Carpentier and Jans worked on the new machines, while Yash Terekura relocated from Japan to the United States. He got the independence to work as a maverick inventor engineer. He started to build a new video game console based on the new integrated circuits. He chose the Ultimax name, but it was later changed to Max Machine. As a console, it had just a few kilobytes of memory, which was not enough to store the full bitmap graphics. In November of 1981, Bob Russell and Yannis approached Carpentier as they wanted to work on this VIC-20 replacement instead of the CBM II. Their idea was quite simple. Expand the memory of the Max machine to 16 kilobytes, put into the case of the VIC-20, and in the meanwhile keep the machine as simple and cheap as possible. The discussion quickly escalated to Tramiel, and he once more surprised his engineers. He not just approved the idea to create a sequel, but told them to expand the memory to 64 kilobytes. Of course, as usual, he gave a tough deadline. The team had only 2 months to finish the machine before the winter CES. The rush was really visible on the result. The case with the keyboard was given, and also they reused the major peripherals. The hardware design itself was based on the MAX machine. They designed the VIC 40, this is how they call this new prototype, to handle the MAX machine cards. This is why many people believe that it was more of a game machine than a real computer. The kernel and the BASIC 2.0 was also just an adaptation from the VIC 20. Later on, it was a pain point as many of the features were not supported by the system directly. We had to use a lot of poke commands or assembly to unleash the capabilities of the C64. The engineers worked day and night, and the VIC 40 was displayed in 1982 January in Vegas. It was a secret rushed project, and Tramiel made a decision just before the show. Put it on the floor. The majority of the company was really not aware of it. Marketing guys had to prepare materials on the spot for it. During this process, the name was changed from VIC 40 to C64. It was done to reflect the memory size. The main attraction was still the VIC 20 with its new advertisement and modem. The reception of the C64 prototype was between enthusiasm and disbelief. The price was low compared to its capabilities, and many of the visitors and newspapers were really skeptical if Commodore would be able to keep promises and ship the C64. After the CES, the next step was the preparation for production, but it was hindered by several company affairs. Michael Tomczyk VIC Commodore was split, and the software development part was attached to engineering. At the same time, engineering moved to a new office. Marketing and sales was not happy. Both the secretly developed C64 and the reorganization frustrated them. Engineering was also stressed as sales started to bomb them with requests. The first request was compatibility with VIC 20. Since the VIC II was not a real descent of the first VIC, it was not possible. I do understand sales as the new machine looked like the VIC 20 and also used the same BASIC. Well, this heritage also took their toll. Both engineers and marketing guys were aware how antiquated their BASIC was, and they really wanted to substitute the aging BASIC. It could not handle the new features of the machine, and its disk handling was far from competitors. Both Atari, Apple, and the new IBM PC had a disk operating system. There were multiple ideas. The first one was to release CP/RM for the machine. The other one was to really rewrite at least partially the BASIC, but the first was not released with the machine. Later on, there was some cartridge with CP/RM capabilities with a Z80, and the BASIC upgrade idea was also cancelled. Not because of any kind of license problem, but because there were not enough engineers to code it, and also because it could not fit into the ROM they could produce. At the end, we had to deal with this BASIC 2.0. I mentioned the floppy disk compatibility, which was another blowback. The plan was to have a faster 1541, but just before the PCB went into production, the necessary traces were removed. It happened because the new computer was crammed to the case of the VIC 20. Simply put, there was a lack of space, and someone found it not critical for the new computer. This is why the standard operation speed of the Commodore 1541 was several times slower than Apple or Atari floppy drive. The new VIC and SID were also not ready for shipment. They tried to iron out a few bugs like the noise of the SID, or that was the spark bug for the VIC. The second bug started with a fix. The original color pair of the C64 was a blue screen with white characters. But the NTSC standard, this is the video standard used in the US, had some issue with this color pair, So the engineers implemented a change to get better colors. The result was good at the first look, but they ended with a light blue character on dark blue and random sparks on screen. To make things worse, the big boss was on their neck. Tramiel originally set the launch date to April, but the first C64s hit the shops just in August. If that was not enough, the early production models had a high failure ratio. Also, the yield of the VIC chip was quite low. The problems were partially caused by the crowded VIC-20 case and also by the assembly quality. I read stories where Commodore intentionally sold C64s before Christmas with a bad VIC chip just to be able to ship enough boxes to their partners. But what did you find in the box if there was one waiting for you under the Christmas tree? Let's check it out.
The world's best-selling family computer just got better. So bring home the new Commodore 64 now. A Commodore Christmas to all. And to all,
It is very hard to select one of these boxes. I tried to use the most common one. This machine was produced in 1984 in UK. So this one is a European model. It is not the earliest model, but as the C64s were produced for more than 10 years, it is a quite early model. Let me unbox it and let's see what is inside. So I have here the C64 itself and the PSU. This PSU is not for this model, but you can see the problem here. Simply saying, I don't know what they use, but the chemicals slowly but surely just dismantling these plastics. Okay, so what we have here is the C64 itself. So this is the C64 from the box and the connectors. What I have here is the memory expansion, TV output, video output, serial. So this is where I can connect the floppy disk or printer, cassette tape, and the user port. On the right side, I have a on-off switch, the power connector, and the two joystick ports. And that's it. This is really a simple machine, and it is easy to identify the early models because those had these dark keyboards. Of course, the function keys and all the colors changed through the time. It happened because they had multiple suppliers and they tried to simplify the machine step by step. In 1986, they redesigned the machine and they introduced this one. As you can see, this is Commodore 64 Model C. What is the difference? Let me unbox it and compare the two models. It is easy to identify, it has a different case. But why did they change the casing? The reason behind is very simple. It was an old style, very friendly computer, but they introduced the Commodore 128 and they just unified the design language. So I have a 128 here, and if you check out the two, yes, so this is the big brother and this is the smaller C64, they are really similar. But now I'm talking about the C64. There was one more important variant, especially in Europe, the Commodore 64G. If you check it out, the color is similar to the Type C. Also the keyboard is very similar. They really moved all the stamps from the bottom. So from this side, if I move back the old one, you can see all the signs here. So all the Commodore symbols here. And they moved everything up to the keyboard. They did it for a single reason, to make it cheaper. It is easier to produce this keyboard because on the later models there are just stickers on the keys. Additionally, they produced a cost reduction variant of the C model, and this is one of them, where the casing is not fastened, so there are no screws, they are just clipped together. I can just repeat myself, they made it just because of a single reason, to make it cheaper to produce. So this is the C variant, which looks really nice. How many of these were produced? Well, no one knows the exact number. It is somewhere between 12 and 17 million, but As I heard, maybe they just made and mixed all the serial numbers because of multiple reasons. We can say they made it because there were more production facilities and each had a different numbering scheme. But also there were rumors they used this to cheat with the taxes. No matter, let's check out what is inside, because they changed not just the casing and the keyboards, but as well as all the PCB layout and chips to reduce the amount of the components and the manufacturing cost. You can see side by side the two PCBs. On the left side, we have an early model. There are a lot of integrated circuits, while on the right side, the number of the ICs are, let's say, half of the original. Also, the size of the PCB were reduced. There were many revisions, so they made it step by step. I think the biggest steps were when they integrated a lot of things to the Super PLA and when they reduced the amount of the memory chips, so they went down from 8 to 2 memory chips, while the Super PLA includes a lot of TTL ICs as well as the color memory. As MOS improved their production technologies, they also changed how they manufacture the CPU, the VIC and the SID. In one hand, it was really great because this kind of computers consume less power, so they are not really getting as warm as an early model. In the other hand, this change introduced some incompatibility. For example, they corrected one problem with the SID chip, and after this change, the digital analog conversion, which was a trick to use this error or bug in the chip, was not really working. The speech or other digital analog conversion was not really audible on these new machines. But there is a small modification what we can use to get back this functionality, so it is not really a problem. If anyone is asking which one to buy, most of the time I just recommend this new version, so either the C or the G type, simply because they are more reliable. But if you're a collector, let's go for the original old version. I don't know which one do you prefer. It's up to you. If you had the original this type, then go for this one. But I also like the new revisions. If you are lucky, you can find on the flea market one of those special bundles. When I was a kid, we had a Super Games bundle, which included this cart with 3 games and a joystick. But especially in Europe, they produced many variants. Commodore even produced specialized versions for different shops. For example, there is the Aldi version. Aldi is a German company, and they really sold in their shops the Commodore 64s, and they ordered enough to have their own batch. But if you want to collect all the variants, I think it is impossible, because when there was a change from this model to the newer one or anything like that, they really built all the PCBs to the old house or the old PCB to the new house or whatever mixtures you can imagine, because if there was something on stock, they just used it. I have 2 variants on my wish list. One is the ugly one, which is the Australian version, and the other one is the Japanese model with the kanjis on the keyboard. Until now, I talked about the hardware, but there is also the software side. If we are talking about these machines, then until 1985, the majority of the programs were productivity or educational or whatsoever, so the games took over the market somewhere in 1985. I think the reason was twofold. First of all, at the beginning, the coders had to study the computer and learn how to program it. It was easier to port existing basic programs or other business software. And the other reason was the 16-bit computers. They hit the market step by step. The IBM PC was much more expensive, so there was enough distance, as well as later on there was the Macintosh. Its price was also very high, but as the Atari ST and the Amiga hit the market, this computer was really obsolete. But at the same time, these computers were very cheap, so the role of these computers changed to mainly to gaming, so kind of game console, with the functionality or basic functionality of a computer. And this is exactly how I used my C64. I played a lot and at the same time I learned basic and later on assembly.
You can play exciting games like Adrian Mole.
Hooray! What you doing, Dad?
Capturing the beauties of nature, son.
You can draw fabulous pictures. You can even play music.
You may ask, how could it happen? This model was replaced by the C, so by this model, but the hardware remained the same. There are different answers. The first answer is they try to substitute this computer with the C128. But I think it is not a real answer because the SID and the VIC chip from this computer was just moved to the new computer, so those were not really rehauled. How could it happen? There was no one to redesign the chip and make a new variant, a kind of VIC III, from the VIC II. With the success of VIC 20, the stock price of Commodore really started to fly. It caused a problem because Tramiel gave a lot of stock options to different people, especially to engineers. But when he realized how much would it cost, then he made a change and he cut back retrospectively those offers. It was a mean step and the engineers were not so happy. Additionally, his engineers expected some reward or compensation for the lot of overtime they made to plan and prepare for production the C64. But Tramiel had a different view because he expected the first C64s for spring, so somewhere in April, but those were shipped to the shops somewhere in August. Mainly because of that, the engineers left the company. They started a new company, but as usual from Tramiel, he sued them. If I told you that he was a not so nice guy, well, I think I already told you his slogan earlier. He often said, "Business is war." After the departure of his engineers, the new version of the VIC and SID chips were put on hold. But not just engineers left the company, but also the mastermind behind the advertisements. Keith Spencer, who was responsible for the relaunch of VIC 20 and the early advertisements of the C64s, also left the company, moved somewhere to the Bahamas as far as I know. He sold all his stocks and retired. But there was even more. The Commodore machines before the VIC and the C64 were sold in specialized shops. With the VIC 20 they changed their sales strategy and they started to sell those in retail shops like Toys R Us. It caused two more problems. The small mom and pop shops had to pay more for the C64s they sold to their customers than someone who just went to the Toys R Us and bought from the shelf. It ruined the relationship between Commodore and those small shops. And this relationship was a key element to sell business machines. Furthermore, Tramiel screwed the big shops several times. He reduced the price of the C64 without any pre-warning. It was a problem because the big shops were not able to clear their stocks before the new price introduction, so they lost money on their stocks. It hit the reputation of Commodore after a while. I think I talked enough about the history of the Commodore 64 as well as about its development. I hope you find it interesting. Let me show you a few games I really enjoyed in the late 80s. Join me for the next time. Goodbye.
1, 2, 3. Hit it. Outrun.
another visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever.